The champagne glass shattered on the marble floor, but nobody looked down. Every eye in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was fixed on Gavin Prescott's face. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. 5 minutes ago, he was sneering at his ex-wife, mocking her off-the-rack dress and lonely existence while clutching his 24-year-old fiancée. Now? He was paralyzed, because Alexander Knight, the ruthlessly private billionaire who owns half of Manhattan, had just walked up to that lonely ex-wife, pulled her close, and kissed her like he was dying of thirst. And the worst part for Gavin? The microphone was still on. Charlotte Webb stared at the cream-colored envelope resting on her scratched IKEA kitchen table. It looked like a dove sitting in a coal mine. The gold embossing caught the flickering light of her apartment's dying bulb. The 15th Annual Kensington Charity Gala, the Pierre Hotel, black tie. A year ago, Charlotte wouldn't have just received an invitation. She would have been organizing the seating chart. She would have been arguing with florists about the shade of hydrangeas and ensuring that the governor wasn't seated next to his ex-mistress. But that was before. That was before Gavin Prescott. Charlotte took a sip of lukewarm, instant coffee, the bitterness matching the taste in her mouth. 10 years. She had given Gavin 10 years of her life. She had worked 2 jobs to put him through business school, edited every single one of his proposals, and charmed every investor who walked through the doors of Prescott and Company. She was the silent engine that built his empire. And how did he repay her? With divorce papers served on her 32nd birthday? No, it was worse than that. He had served her papers citing irreconcilable differences, while moving his pregnant mistress, Jessica Vane, into the Hamptons estate Charlotte had spent 3 years renovating. Because of a meticulously crafted prenuptial agreement Charlotte had signed when they were 22 and blindly in love. An agreement Gavin's shark of a lawyer had updated without her realizing the implications. She walked away with almost nothing. No alimony. No shares in the company. Just her terrifyingly small savings account and a profound sense of humiliation. "You should go," her friend Becca said, leaning against the counter. Becca was the only one who had stuck around after the money dried up. "Seriously, Char, you need to get back out there." "Go," Charlotte laughed. A dry, cracking sound. "To watch Gavin parade Jessica around? He's the keynote speaker, Becca. He's going to be accepting the Man of the Year award." The irony is suffocating. "You're a paralegal at a top firm now," Becca argued. "Your boss, Mr. Henderson, is going. He expects you to be there to network. If you hide in this apartment, Gavin wins. If you go, hold your head high and show him you're not broken. You win." Charlotte looked down at her hands. They were shaking. She wasn't broken? She felt pulverized. But she remembered the last thing Gavin had said to her as she packed her boxes. "You're nothing without me, Charlotte. You're just a background character in my story. Nobody will remember your name in 6 months." That sentence had haunted her nightmares for 365 days. "I have nothing to wear," Charlotte whispered, the excuse weak even to her own ears. Becca grinned, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "That's why you have me. My cousin works in wardrobe for Broadway. We're going to get you a dress that makes Jessica look like a toddler playing dress-up." 3 days later, Charlotte stood in front of a floor-length mirror. The dress was a vintage emerald green silk slip dress from the 90s, backless and daring, clinging to curves she usually hid under oversized blazers. It was elegant, timeless, and dangerous. "You look like a weapon," Becca said, handing her a pair of borrowed diamond drop earrings. "Go break some hearts." Charlotte took a deep breath. She wasn't going to break hearts. She just wanted to survive the night without crying in the bathroom. She grabbed her clutch, summoned an Uber, and headed toward Fifth Avenue. She didn't know it yet, but the background character was about to take the lead role. The Pierre Hotel smelled of expensive perfume and old money. The air was thick with the sound of string quartets and polite, hushed laughter. Charlotte handed her coat to the check-in attendant, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She scanned the room. It was a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. She recognized half the people there, former friends who had deleted her number the day the divorce was finalized. She saw Mrs. Vanderwall, the socialite who used to beg Charlotte for lunch dates, look right through her as if she were a ghost. "Keep moving," Charlotte told herself. "Find Mr. Henderson, say hello, drink one glass of champagne, and leave." She made her way toward the bar, avoiding eye contact. She was almost safe, almost invisible, until a booming, familiar voice cut through the ambient noise. "Well, well, if it isn't the ghost of Christmas past." Charlotte froze. Her blood turned to ice. She turned slowly. Gavin stood there, holding court near the center of the room. He looked older, heavier, his face flushed with expensive scotch and arrogance. Hanging on his arm was Jessica. Jessica was 24, blonde, and undeniably beautiful, though she looked uncomfortable in a red sequined gown that was a little too tight and a little too bright for the somber elegance of the Pierre. "Gavin," Charlotte said, her voice steady despite the nausea rolling in her stomach. "Congratulations on the award." Gavin didn't say thank you. He laughed, a cruel, barking sound that drew the attention of the surrounding circle. "I didn't think you could afford a ticket to this event, Charlotte. Did you sneak in through the kitchen? Or is your new, what is it, a paralegal job? Paying better than I thought?" A few people chuckled. The shame burned Charlotte's cheeks. "I'm here as a guest of my firm," Charlotte said, lifting her chin. "Excuse me." She tried to step away, but Jessica stepped in front of her, swirling her wine glass. "Oh, don't run away, Charlotte," Jessica cooed, her voice high and sugary. "We were just talking about the renovations on the Hamptons house. You know that dreadful yellow kitchen you loved? We gutted it. It's all marble now. Much more modern." It was a petty, calculated dig. That kitchen had been Charlotte's sanctuary. "I'm sure it's lovely," Charlotte said tightly. "It is," Gavin sneered, stepping closer, invading her personal space. He lowered his voice so only she and the immediate circle could hear. "Look at you, Charlotte. You look desperate, wearing a used dress, showing up to my night. Do you really think anyone here cares about you? You're an embarrassment. You should have stayed in whatever hole you crawled into." Tears pricked Charlotte's eyes. This was it. The nightmare. He was winning. He was rich, powerful, and adored. And she was just the discarded ex-wife being bullied in the middle of a ballroom. "Leave her alone, Gavin," a quiet voice said from the side. It was Mr. Henderson, her boss. He looked nervous. Gavin was a major client of the firm. "Stay out of this, Henderson," Gavin snapped, not even looking at him. He kept his eyes pinned on Charlotte. "I'm just giving her some friendly advice. Go home, Charlotte. You don't belong in this world anymore." The silence around them grew heavy. People were watching, judging, waiting for her to break. Charlotte gripped her clutch so hard her knuckles turned white. She opened her mouth to retort, to scream, to do something, but her throat closed up, and then the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The heavy double doors at the top of the grand staircase swung open. Usually late arrivals were ignored, but the hush that fell over the room started from the back and swept forward like a wave. "Is that?" someone whispered. "It can't be," another murmured. Walking down the stairs was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and dressed by Italian tailors. He wore a tuxedo that cost more than Charlotte's annual salary. He had dark, sweeping hair, a jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and eyes that scanned the room with bored, predatory indifference. Alexander Knight, the billionaire tech mogul, the man who had just bought the frantic remnants of the European banking sector for sport. He was notorious for two things: making ruthless business deals and never, ever attending social events. He was a recluse, a phantom, and he was walking straight towards them, Gavin straightened his tie, his arrogance instantly replaced by a desperate, sycophantic eagerness. Alexander Knight was the whale Gavin had been trying to land for 5 years. If he could get Knight to invest in Prescott and Company, Gavin would be set for life. "Alexander!" Gavin called out, stepping away from Jessica and Charlotte, his hand extended. "Mr. Knight, what an honor. I'm Gavin Prescott. We spoke on the phone briefly regarding the—" Alexander Knight didn't even blink. He didn't slow down. He walked right past Gavin's outstretched hand as if Gavin were a waiter holding a tray of empty glasses. Gavin froze, his hand hanging in midair. The snub was brutal, public. Alexander didn't stop until he was standing directly in front of Charlotte. He towered over her, his presence overwhelming. The smell of sandalwood and rain filled her senses. Charlotte looked up, bewildered. She had never met this man in her life. She had seen him on the cover of Forbes, but she had never been in the same zip code as him. Alexander looked down at her. His cold, dark eyes suddenly softened. A look of intense, pained relief washed over his face. "I'm sorry I'm late," Alexander said, his voice a deep, rough baritone that vibrated in Charlotte's chest. Charlotte stammered. "I'm sorry?" "Don't be," he interrupted. He reached out, his large, warm hand cupping her cheek with a tenderness that made the entire room gasp. "I told you I wouldn't let you do this alone." Gavin's jaw dropped. Jessica dropped her wine glass. It didn't break, but red wine splashed onto her shoes. She didn't notice. "You know him," Gavin choked out, his voice squeaking. Alexander ignored Gavin entirely. He looked at Charlotte's eyes, which were wide with shock. Then he leaned in. "Just go with it," he whispered, so faintly that only she could hear. And then Alexander Knight kissed her. It wasn't a polite peck on the cheek. He pulled her flush against his body, his hand sliding to the small of her back, possessing her. He kissed her with a hunger and a passion that curled her toes. For a moment, the ballroom vanished. The humiliation vanished. There was only the heat of his mouth and the strength of his arms. When he finally pulled back, Charlotte was breathless, her lips swollen, her face flushed. Alexander kept his arm around her waist, turning to face Gavin, who looked like he was having a stroke. "Prescott," Alexander said, his voice cold as steel, "I heard you had some things to say to my fiancé. Would you like to repeat them to me?" The room went dead silent. "Fiancé?" Charlotte's brain short-circuited. Gavin turned a shade of purple that defied medical science. "Fionn. Charlotte. But she's nobody." Alexander's eyes narrowed. "Careful. You're speaking about the woman who owns my heart. And as of this morning, the woman who owns the majority holding in the debt your company just acquired." Gavin's knees actually buckled. The silence in the ballroom was shattered by the frantic clicking of camera shutters. The press, usually relegated to the red carpet outside, had somehow sensed blood in the water and were craning their necks from the entryway. Gavin Prescott looked like a fish gasping on dry land. "Debt?" he squeaked, tugging at his collar. "What do you mean, debt? Prescott and Company is solvent. We just acquired—" "You acquired a toxic asset bundle from the arch-rival of my subsidiary," Alexander cut in smoothly, his voice bored but carrying a lethal weight. "My team bought the note this morning. Technically, Mr. Prescott, I own your office building. I own your intellectual property. And unless you want me to call in the loan tomorrow morning, which would bankrupt you before lunch, I suggest you apologize to my fiancé. Sincerity would be appreciated, though I doubt you're capable of it." Jessica, realizing the tide had turned violently, tried to detach herself from Gavin's arm, stepping back as if failure were contagious. Gavin looked at Charlotte. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. For 10 years, he had looked at her with dismissal. Now, he had to look up. "Charlotte," Gavin stammered, I didn't know. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to—" "Save it," Charlotte said. Her voice was quiet, but for the first time in a year, it didn't shake. The warmth of Alexander's hand on her waist felt like a shield. "You meant every word, Gavin. You just didn't think there would be consequences." She looked up at Alexander. "I'd like to leave now." "As you wish," Alexander said softly. He turned them around, guiding her through the parted crowd. It was like Moses parting the Red Sea. The same people who had ignored her 10 minutes ago were now nodding, smiling, and whispering in awe. Alexander Knight's fiancé. The title alone had rewritten her social DNA in seconds. They swept past the stunned check-in desk, out the revolving doors, and into the biting New York night. A sleek black Maybach was idling at the curb. A driver in a cap opened the door instantly. Alexander helped her in, protecting her head with his hand, then slid in beside her. The door thudded shut, sealing them in a cocoon of silence and expensive leather. "Go," Alexander told the driver. "The penthouse." As the car pulled away, leaving the chaos of the Pierre Hotel behind, the adrenaline crashed out of Charlotte's system. She slumped back against the seat, her hands trembling again. She turned to look at the stranger sitting next to her. In the dim streetlights passing by, Alexander Knight looked even more intimidating. He was staring out the window, his jaw set. "Who are you?" Charlotte whispered. "And why did you do that?" Alexander turned to look at her. The softness he had shown in the ballroom was gone, replaced by a calculating, intense gaze. "I'm a man who needed a fiancé very quickly," he said bluntly, "and you were a woman who needed a savior." It seemed like a fair exchange. Charlotte blinked. "A fair exchange? You told everyone we're getting married. You told Gavin you own his debt. Is that true?" "The debt part is true. My acquisitions team is very efficient," Alexander said, adjusting his cufflinks. "As for the engagement, that is up to you." "I don't understand," Alexander sighed, shifting to face her fully. "I have a problem, Charlotte. I need to close a merger with a Japanese conglomerate, the Tanaka Group. Mr. Tanaka is a traditionalist. He doesn't trust men who are unmarried at my age. He thinks a man without a family lacks stability. The deal is worth $4 billion. I was planning to hire an actress, but..." He paused, his eyes scanning her face. "I saw you. You saw me getting humiliated. I saw you standing your ground," he corrected. "I saw a woman with dignity surrounded by vultures. And I recognized you." "You recognized me?" "I've been tracking Prescott and Company for 3 years," Alexander revealed. "I knew Gavin was an empty suit. I knew the proposals, the strategy, the efficiency. It was all coming from somewhere else. When I looked into it, I found you. You were the architect of his success, Charlotte. He just took the credit." Charlotte felt a lump form in her throat. No one had ever acknowledged that. Not even Gavin. "So," Alexander continued, his voice lowering, "here is my proposition. I need a wife for 1 year to secure the Tanaka deal and stabilize my board of directors. You need to not be destroyed by your ex-husband. You need resources. You need to reclaim your reputation." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a ring box. He flipped it open. Inside sat a vintage cushion-cut diamond that was easily 10 carats, glowing in the semi-darkness. "Marry me, Charlotte. On paper, in public, be Mrs. Knight. In exchange, I will give you unlimited access to my resources, a $5 million severance when the contract ends, and the pleasure of watching Gavin Prescott beg for your forgiveness every time he needs a loan extension." Charlotte stared at the ring. It was insane. It was a movie plot. It was a lie. But then she thought about the IKEA table. She thought about Jessica's smirk. She thought about Gavin telling her she was a background character. "What are the rules?" she asked, her voice strengthening. Alexander smiled, a small, dangerous curve of his lips. "Simple. We sell the romance to the world. Behind closed doors, we are partners, allies. No intimacy is required unless you want it. But in public, you have to look like you adore me." Charlotte looked at the ring, then at Alexander's intense, dark eyes. He had saved her back there. He saw her value when no one else did. 1 year? she asked. 1 year. Charlotte took the ring out of the box. Her hands were steady now. She slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Deal, she said. Charlotte woke up in a bed that was larger than her entire previous apartment. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, cool and smooth against her skin. For a moment she panicked, thinking she had overslept for work at the law firm. Then the memories of the night before crashed into her. The Pierre, the kiss, the contract. She sat up, looking around. The room was modern, minimalist, and breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Central Park. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," she called out, pulling the sheet up. A woman in a sharp grey suit walked in, followed by a rolling rack of clothes. "Good morning, Miss Webb. Or should I say, the future Mrs. Knight. I'm Sophia, Mr. Knight's personal assistant." "Where is Alexander?" Charlotte asked, the name feeling strange on her tongue. "Mr. Knight is in the gym downstairs. He asked me to inform you that your resignation letter to Mr. Henderson has already been drafted and sent, with your approval, of course, citing a conflict of interest due to your new engagement. Mr. Henderson sent a fruit basket. It's in the kitchen." Charlotte's jaw dropped. "He quit my job for me? He anticipated you wouldn't want to deal with the press outside your office," Sophia said, walking to the window and pressing a button. The shades retracted, revealing a horde of paparazzi vans camped out 30 stories below on the street. "You are the most Googled person in New York this morning, Miss Webb." Sophia gestured to the rack of clothes. "Mr. Knight also noted that while your vintage taste is impeccable, you will need a wardrobe that befits your new station. Chanel, Dior, McQueen. We have a stylist coming at noon, but these are for today." Charlotte got out of bed, walking over to the rack. It wasn't just clothes. It was armor. Cashmere sweaters, tailored trousers, silk blouses. "Also," Sophia handed her a tablet, "your phone has been blowing up, so we took the liberty of transferring your contacts to a new secure device. The old one is off, but you might want to see these." On the tablet screen were missed calls. Gavin, 14 missed calls. Gavin, 6 voicemails. Jessica, 3 text messages. Charlotte tapped on one of Jessica's texts. "You manipulative BTCH. You planned this. Gavin is freaking out. Call him back right now or I'll sue." Charlotte laughed. It was a genuine belly-deep laugh. "Sue me for what? Getting a better offer?" "Exactly," Alexander's voice came from the doorway. Charlotte spun around. Alexander was leaning against the doorframe. He was wearing workout gear, sweatpants and a tight t-shirt that left little to the imagination regarding his physique. He was sweating slightly, his hair messy. He looked devastatingly human, unlike the statue from the night before. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, walking into the room. Yes, thank you," Charlotte said, clutching the silk robe she had found at the foot of the bed. "You move fast, Alexander. Quitting my job? Buying me clothes?" "We have a lunch meeting with the board of directors at 1 p.m., Alexander said, grabbing a water bottle from a side table. "They are skeptical. They think I hired an escort. I need you to prove them wrong. I need you to be the Charlotte Webb who ran Prescott and Company. Sharp, intelligent, untouchable." "And Gavin?" Charlotte asked. Alexander's face darkened. "Gavin has been trying to reach my office all morning. He's claiming there was a misunderstanding about the debt. I have a meeting with him tomorrow. You will be there." "I will." "He needs to see that you aren't just my fiancé. You are my partner. He needs to see that he can't bully you anymore. Are you ready for that?" Charlotte looked at the tablet, at the desperate texts from the people who had tried to break her. She looked at the diamond on her hand. "I'm ready," she said. The restaurant was Le Bernardin. The private room was filled with 6 men and 2 women, all over the age of 60, all looking at Charlotte with thinly veiled suspicion. Sterling, the chairman of the board, was the first to speak. He was a man with a face like a dried apple and eyes like flint. "So," Sterling said, not bothering to pick up his menu, "this is the mystery woman. A paralegal, I hear. Divorced. A paralegal who managed a mid-sized equity firm for 10 years from behind the scenes," Alexander said, taking his seat next to Charlotte. He didn't look at Sterling. He looked at Charlotte, giving her a subtle nod. "Go." Charlotte straightened her spine. She remembered every meeting she had sat in on with Gavin, silently feeding him answers. She didn't have to be silent anymore. "Mr. Sterling," Charlotte said, her voice clear and projecting well, "I understand your concern. A whirlwind romance looks volatile on a stock ticker. But if you check the quarterly reports for Prescott and Company, from 2018 to 2023, you'll see a 200% increase in operational efficiency. That was my restructuring plan. Alexander didn't choose me because I'm a paralegal. He chose me because I know how to navigate a shark tank without bleeding." She picked up her wine glass, holding Sterling's gaze. "And regarding the Tanaka deal, I lived in Tokyo for 2 years during my father's diplomatic posting. I speak fluent Japanese. I know that Tanaka-san collects Edo period woodblock prints. I assume you have a gift prepared for our meeting next week?" The room went silent. Alexander masked a smile behind his hand. Sterling blinked. "You speak Japanese?" "Hi," Charlotte said with a perfect accent, "and I know that Tanaka values family honor above profit. A wife who can converse with him in his native tongue will seal that deal faster than any spreadsheet you present." Sterling cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. The hostility evaporated, replaced by begrudging respect. "Well, that is unexpected. Good work, Alexander." Under the table, Alexander's hand found Charlotte's knee. He squeezed it gently. It was a victory lap. The next day, Charlotte walked into Alexander's office at Knight Enterprises. It was a glass fortress in the sky. Sitting in the waiting area, looking small and sweaty, was Gavin Prescott. When Gavin saw Charlotte, he stood up so fast he knocked over a magazine rack. "Charlotte!" he exclaimed, rushing toward her. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, his suit rumpled. "Thank God. You have to talk to him. You have to tell him we're family. You can't let him bankrupt me." Charlotte stopped. She was wearing a cream-colored power suit that cost more than Gavin's car. Her hair was blown out in sleek waves. She looked like a queen. "We aren't family, Gavin," she said coolly. "You made that very clear when you served me divorce papers on my birthday." "I was stressed. I made a mistake," Gavin pleaded, reaching for her hand. "Don't touch her," Alexander's voice boomed. Alexander stood in the doorway of his office, flanked by 2 security guards. "Mr. Prescott, come in. We have terms to discuss." They walked into the office. Gavin sat in the low chair, while Alexander and Charlotte sat behind the massive oak desk, presenting a united front. "Here is the situation," Alexander said, sliding a folder across the desk. "I am restructuring your debt. I am giving you a grace period of 6 months. Gavin slumped with relief. "Oh, thank you. Thank you, Alexander." "Don't thank me." Alexander pointed to Charlotte. "Thank her. I wanted to liquidate you." Charlotte suggested mercy. Gavin looked at Charlotte, his eyes wet. You did that for me?" "I didn't do it for you," Charlotte said, leaning forward. "I did it because I don't want your failure to be my baggage. But there is a condition." "Anything," Gavin said. "You will publicly admit that the success of Prescott and Company during the last decade was a joint effort," Charlotte said. "You will give an interview to the Wall Street Journal correcting the narrative, and you will return my grandmother's engagement ring, the one you gave to Jessica." Gavin paled. "Jessica. She loves that ring. She won't give it up." "Then I guess you'll be bankrupt by noon," Alexander said, reaching for the phone. "No, no," Gavin yelled. "Okay, I'll get it. I'll get the ring. Just, please." Charlotte leaned back, a feeling of profound catharsis washing over her. It wasn't about the ring. It was about taking back the things he had stolen, her credit, her history, and her dignity. As Gavin shuffled out of the office, defeated, Charlotte felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Alexander looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite place. It wasn't just approval. It was admiration. "You were ruthless," he murmured. "I like it." "I had a good teacher," Charlotte replied, meeting his gaze. The air between them crackled. The fake engagement was barely 48 hours old, but the lines were already blurring. Alexander wasn't just her savior anymore. He was her partner. And for the first time, Charlotte wondered if the danger wasn't Gavin or the press, but the man standing right in front of her, because falling for her fake fiancé wasn't part of the contract. But as he looked at her lips, she realized it might be inevitable. The flight to Tokyo was a blur of champagne and strategy meetings at 40,000 feet. Alexander's private jet was an office in the sky. But the tension between them had shifted. It wasn't just business anymore. Every time Alexander's hand brushed hers while passing a document, the air in the cabin seemed to thin. They landed in a rainy, neon-lit Tokyo, but instead of a Western hotel, the motorcade took them deep into the hills of Hakone to a private, centuries-old ryokan, traditional inn, owned by the Tanaka family. "This is a test," Alexander murmured, as they stepped out of the car into the misty mountain air. "Tanaka-san doesn't do boardrooms. He wants to see who we are when the armor comes off." They were greeted by bowing staff and led to a suite that overlooked a bamboo forest. The room was sparse, elegant, and, crucially, contained only 2 futons laid out on the tatami mats, separated by mere inches. Charlotte looked at the sleeping arrangements, her pulse skipping. "I can sleep in the sitting room," Alexander offered, his voice tight. He looked uncomfortable, stripped of his suits and skyscrapers. "Don't be ridiculous," Charlotte said, channeling a confidence she didn't feel. "We have to sell the image, Alexander. If the staff sees us sleeping in separate rooms, the deal is dead." That evening, the dinner with Mr. Tanaka was an exercise in high-wire tension. Tanaka was a man of 70, with eyes that saw everything. He spoke little English, preferring to let his translator dominate, which allowed him to observe. Midway through the kaiseki meal, Tanaka spoke rapidly in Japanese, his tone sharp. The translator hesitated. "He says," the translator began nervously, "that he has heard rumors, that Mr. Knight is a cold machine. He worries that a man who cannot love a woman cannot love a company's legacy." Alexander stiffened. He opened his mouth to recite a prepared line about corporate synergy, but Charlotte placed a hand on his arm. She turned to Tanaka and bowed her head slightly. She spoke in flawless, soft Japanese. "Tanaka-san," she said, "a machine does not build. It only processes. Alexander is not a machine. He is a fortress. He protects what is inside." It took a long time for the gates to open. But now that I am inside, I know that his loyalty is absolute. He will protect your legacy as fiercely as he protects me. The table went silent. The only sound was the bamboo water fountain clacking in the garden. Tanaka looked at Charlotte, then at Alexander. For the first time, the old man smiled. He raised his sake cup. "To the fortress," Tanaka said in English. The deal was signed an hour later. Back in their room, the adrenaline was crashing. Alexander paced the tatami mats, loosening his yukata. "You were incredible," he said, stopping to look at her. "You saved the merger. I would have quoted revenue projections. You gave him poetry." "I gave him the truth," Charlotte said quietly, sitting on the edge of her futon. "Or a version of it." Alexander walked over to her. The distance between them was charged with electricity. He knelt down so they were eye level. The room was dim, lit only by paper lanterns. "And what is the truth, Charlotte?" he asked, his voice rough, "because the lines are getting blurry for me." Charlotte's breath caught. "We have a contract, Alexander. 1 year. Contracts can be renegotiated," he whispered. He reached out, tracing the line of her jaw with his thumb. His touch was fire. "Tell me you don't feel this. Tell me I'm just a business partner." Charlotte leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. "I can't tell you that." He kissed her then. It wasn't like the performance at the Pierre. This was slow, desperate, and terrifyingly real. It was a kiss that tasted of sack and rain and longing. He pushed her gently back onto the futon, his weight settling over her, making her feel small and safe and desired. But just as things began to escalate, Alexander pulled back. He was breathing hard, his forehead resting against hers. "I can't," he groaned. "Not like this. Not while you're under contract. I won't be another man who takes advantage of you, Charlotte." He rolled away, lying on his back and staring at the ceiling. "Go to sleep, Charlotte, before I forget my honor." Charlotte lay there in the dark, her heart hammering. Gavin had used her for 10 years and discarded her. Alexander had known her for a week and was treating her with more respect than she had ever known. She realized then that the danger wasn't the contract. The danger was that she was falling in love with her fake husband. They returned to New York as a power couple. The press couldn't get enough of them. "The Billionaire and the Beauty," the headlines read. Photos of them holding hands in Tokyo were plastered across every tabloid. But happiness in New York is like blood in the water for sharks. 2 weeks after their return, Charlotte was in her new office at the Knight Foundation. Alexander had put her in charge of his philanthropic arm when her private line rang. "Hello? Did you enjoy Tokyo?" Jessica's voice dripped with venom. Charlotte sighed, leaning back in her leather chair. "Jessica, I'm busy. If you want to return the blender from the wedding registry, you'll have to call my assistant." "You think you're so smart," Jessica hissed. "But I know, Charlotte. I know it's fake." Charlotte's grip on the phone tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I have a friend who works in HR at Knight Enterprises," Jessica lied. Or maybe she didn't. "She told me about the frantic paperwork, the NDA, the transfer of funds the day after the gala. It's a setup. You're a hired escort with a ring." "Be careful, Jessica," Charlotte warned. "No, you be careful," Jessica snapped. "Because the Winter Solstice Gala is this Friday. Gavin and I will be there. And unless you want me to go to page 6 with the story that Alexander Knight is lying to his shareholders about his marital status, you're going to do something for me." "What do you want?" "I want Gavin's debt wiped completely. Not restructured, erased. And I want a public apology from you. I want you to admit you were a bad wife." Charlotte laughed coldly. "You're delusional." "Am I?" "See you Friday, Charlotte. Wear something pretty. It'll be your last night in high society." The Metropolitan Museum of Art was transformed into a winter wonderland. White roses, ice sculptures, and the elite of Manhattan drinking vodka chilled to sub-zero temperatures. Charlotte wore a gown of liquid silver designed by Alexander McQueen. She looked like a star descended to earth, but inside she was shaking. Alexander sensed it. He placed a hand on the small of her back as they posed for photographers on the steps. "You're tense," he murmured. "Is it Gavin?" "It's Jessica," Charlotte whispered. "She knows Alexander. She claims she has proof the engagement is a sham. She's threatening to expose us tonight." Alexander's expression didn't change. He waved at a camera, smiling his perfect, detached smile. "Let her try." "Alexander, this is serious. The Tanaka deal closes next week. If a scandal breaks now, do you trust me?" Alexander looked down at her, his dark eyes intense. Charlotte hesitated. "Yes. Then let me handle the sharks. You just look beautiful." They entered the great hall. It was crowded, and there, standing by the Temple of Dendor, were Gavin and Jessica. Jessica looked triumphant. She was wearing a white dress that looked suspiciously like a wedding gown. Gavin looked nervous, sweating through his tux. As Charlotte and Alexander approached, Jessica stepped forward, her voice loud enough to carry over the music. "Charlotte, so brave of you to show your face." The crowd quieted. People loved a scene. "Jessica," Charlotte said calmly, I see you're wearing white. Still trying to be the bride. I'm the only honest woman here, Jessica announced, turning to the gathering crowd. She raised a champagne glass. Everyone, can I have your attention? I have a delicious little story to tell you about the future Mrs. Knight. Gavin grabbed Jessica's arm. Jess, don't. Alexander owns us. Shut up, Gavin. Jessica shook him off. He won't own us after this. The press will eat him alive for fraud. She turned back to Alexander, a smirk on her lips. Tell them, Alexander. Tell them how much you're paying her to pretend to love you. The silence in the museum was deafening. Hundreds of eyes darted between the billionaire and the accuser. Alexander slowly unbuttoned his tuxedo jacket. He stepped forward, placing himself between Charlotte and the crowd. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. Miss Vane, Alexander said, his voice echoing off the stone walls. You seem to be under the impression that my relationship is a transaction. Because it is, Jessica shrieked. She's a broke paralegal. You hired her. Alexander laughed. It was a dark, rich sound. You're half right. She was broke because your fiancé, he gestured to Gavin, stole 10 years of her labor and left her with nothing. But hired? Alexander turned to Charlotte. He reached into his pocket. But instead of a document or a phone, he pulled out a small, velvet book. I expected you might try this, Alexander said to Jessica, which is why I brought my own proof. He handed the book to a nearby reporter from the New York Times, read the entry from October 14th, 3 years ago. The reporter, confused, opened the book. It was a leather-bound journal. It says, the reporter squinted, saw the Prescott presentation today. The husband is an idiot, but the work is brilliant. Someone else is writing this. I need to find the author. I think I'm in love with a mind I haven't even met yet. The crowd gasped. Alexander continued, read the entry from last month, the day of the Pierre Gala, before I arrived. The reporter flipped the pages, going to the Pierre tonight. I know she'll be there. I can't watch him humiliate her anymore. I don't care about the Tanaka deal. I don't care about the optics. I'm going to get her. If she'll have me, I'm never letting her go. Alexander turned to the crowd. I didn't hire Charlotte Webb because I needed a fake wife. I manufactured a crisis, so I would have an excuse to ask the woman I've admired from afar for 3 years to give me a chance. The contract was my way of protecting her pride. But the feelings? He turned to Charlotte, whose eyes were filled with tears. The feelings have been real since the day I read her first legal brief. Alexander walked up to Charlotte, ignoring the stunned room. I'm tired of pretending this is business, Charlotte. I'm ripping up the contract. He took her hands. Marry me. For real. No expiration date. Be my partner, my wife, my equal. Charlotte looked at him. She saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the same look he had in the ryokan. He had exposed his private journals, his deepest secrets, just to silence her bully. Yes, Charlotte whispered, tears spilling over. Yes, Alexander. He kissed her, and the room erupted in applause. Jessica stood there, mouth open, looking like a fish. Alexander broke the kiss and turned to Gavin. Mr. Prescott, regarding your debt. Gavin trembled. Yes, I'm selling it, Alexander said cheerfully, to a collection agency known for their aggressive tactics. Unless, of course, you escort Miss Vane out of this building immediately and never speak my wife's name again. Gavin didn't hesitate. He grabbed Jessica by the arm. We're leaving! Get off me! Jessica screamed as he dragged her towards the exit, her white dress catching on a sculpture base and ripping audibly. The sound of the tearing fabric was the perfect punctuation mark to a social demise. Charlotte buried her face in Alexander's chest, laughing through her tears. Did you really write those journals? She whispered. Alexander smirked, kissing the top of her head. I wrote them this morning. I figured we needed a backup plan. But the words were true. 6 months later. The fluorescent lights of the Port Authority bus terminal flickered overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow on the wet floor. Gavin Prescott adjusted his tie, a polyester blend he had bought at a discount store, and checked his watch. He was late for his shift. Gavin wasn't a CEO anymore. He wasn't even a manager. After Alexander Knight sold his debt to a ruthless liquidation firm, Prescott and Company had been picked clean like a carcass on the savannah. Now, Gavin was a junior associate at a tax preparation firm in New Jersey, working in a cubicle smaller than his old master bathroom. He stopped at a newsstand to buy a pack of gum, but his hand froze mid-air. Staring back at him from the rack was the cover of Forbes. The photo was striking in black and white. It featured a man and a woman standing on the balcony of a skyscraper. The man was looking at the woman with an intensity that burned through the glossy paper. The woman was looking at the camera, her chin lifted, her eyes sharp and unafraid. The headline screamed in bold letters, "The Power Merger, How Alexander and Charlotte Knight Are Rewriting the Rules of Business." Gavin felt a physical blow to his gut. He looked closer. Charlotte looked radiant. She didn't look like the tired wife who used to organize his files until midnight. She looked like a queen. "You gonna buy that, buddy?" the newsstand owner barked. Gavin swallowed hard. No. He couldn't bear to read the article. He already knew what it said. It would detail how Charlotte had streamlined Knight Enterprises' philanthropic division. It would mention the Tanaka deal. Jessica was gone, of course. She had packed her bags the morning the eviction notice arrived for the Hamptons house, taking the Audi and the dog, screaming that Gavin had ruined her life. Gavin walked away from the newsstand, merging into the grey crowd of commuters. He realized, with a bitterness that would taste like ash in his mouth for the rest of his life, that Charlotte hadn't been the background character. She had been the writer, the director, and the star, and he had written himself out of the script. Lake Como, Italy. Thousands of miles away, the golden hour sun was kissing the surface of Lake Como, turning the water into liquid amber. The air at Villa d'Este smelled of wisteria and expensive champagne. This was not a networking event. There were no cameras, no press, and no contracts. There were only 50 guests, the people who truly mattered. Charlotte stood before a floor-length mirror in the bridal suite. She wore a custom Oscar de la Renta gown, a cascade of French lace and silk that hugged her silhouette before flaring out like a soft cloud. Becca, her maid of honor, wiped a tear from her cheek. "You know, usually I'd make a joke about how you finally got an upgrade, but honestly, Char, you look like you've always belonged here." "I feel like I do," Charlotte smiled. "For the first time in my life, I'm not trying to be enough for someone else. I'm just me." The ceremony took place in the gardens, framed by ancient statues and the sweeping mountains. When Alexander saw her walking down the aisle, the stoic billionaire, the man known as the Fortress, broke. His eyes glistened, and he let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since the day they met. They didn't use generic vows. "Charlotte," Alexander said, his voice rough with emotion, holding her hands tightly at the altar. "I spent my life building an empire because I thought power would keep me safe. I thought relying on anyone else was a weakness. Then you walked into that ballroom in a green dress, terrified but standing your ground, and you tore my walls down. You aren't my acquisition. You aren't my asset. You are my equal. You are the only partner I will ever need." Charlotte squeezed his hands, her voice steady and clear. "For 10 years, I was told I was nothing without a man to lead me. You showed me that I was already everything. I just needed a man strong enough to stand beside me, not in front of me. I love you, Alexander. Not for the safety you give me, but for the man you are when the world isn't watching." Mr. Tanaka, sitting in the front row, nodded solemnly as they kissed. It was a kiss of deep, settled promise. Later that night, after the fireworks had faded, Charlotte and Alexander sat on the private terrace of their suite. A single candle flickered between them. Alexander reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out a folded piece of thick paper. The original contract. The 1-year agreement. He held it over the candle flame. They watched in silence as the paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash, floating away on the Italian breeze. 2 expired terms, Alexander whispered, pulling her into his lap. You know, Charlotte teased, resting her head on his shoulder, I think I'm going to keep the signing bonus. Alexander laughed, a true, unburdened laugh. The 5 million? No, Charlotte placed her hand over his heart. This, and the look on Gavin's face when you told him you owned his debt. Alexander kissed her forehead. Best investment I ever made. Charlotte Webb closed her eyes, listening to the heartbeat of the man who adored her. She was no longer the discarded wife. She was the architect of her own destiny. And that is the story of how Charlotte Webb turned her darkest moment into her brightest victory. It's a reminder that sometimes the people who walk out of your life are just making space for the people who are actually meant to be there. Gavin thought Charlotte was nothing without him, but he forgot the most important rule of life. You never underestimate the person who built your success. I hope you enjoyed this story of karma, romance, and ultimate revenge. If you did, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. What did you think of Alexander's journal trick at the gala? Was it genius or too risky? Let me know in the comments below.